When you watch this film back, though, I mean, I guess in some ways you must sort of scrutinise over the truth and what actually happened and how this is kind of depicting it. It must be quite an emotional experience for you as well, to revisit these memories.
It is emotional. What's most emotional is the same, and I even say it now, I get a little bit verklempt, choked up. It's the same emotion I had at the trial. It happened last night when we had the screening at JW3. Someone came up to me with her elderly mother, and her mother was a survivor, and her mother wanted to thank me. That's pretty amazing, I fought a legal battle. It was frightening, it was difficult, it was long, it was arduous, it screwed up my life for a number of years. But for someone who's a survivor of the Holocaust, who lost her family in the Holocaust, to come up and thank me, that's pretty overwhelming. And that happened a lot during the trial, and it happened in relation to the film as well.
And one of the hardest scenes to watch in the movie is when they go to Auschwitz. And I was wondering if of course, you were present in real life. That must have been such a hard trip. I mean, just watching that scene back must have been the hardest of all.
It was a very hard trip. It was also a very hard trip because I've been to Auschwitz many times for research, visits, etc. But I knew for much of the crew it was the first time, and the producers did something very, very sensitive. They took everyone there a day early, which is an expensive proposition when you're making a film, but to give them a chance to orient themselves, to visit the place, to see the place, so that they wouldn't, the first time they wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be on the set at 6 o'clock in the morning, hello, welcome to Auschwitz, now let's get filming. And I made myself as available as I could to the crew, whether it was the person who was holding the sound, the boom or whatever. I know there's a name for it, but I've forgotten. Or, just in charge of the makeup or the hair or whatever it was. If they had a question, what is this, where is this, what's this about, that I could try to help them.
I mean, just how significant was this case? Because, I mean, had you lost, the repercussions would have been huge. I mean, some would have seen it as though it was legitimising the opinion that the Holocaust didn't exist. I mean, it must have... Did you acknowledge at the time quite how significant it was, or was that kind of in hindsight?
I understood that the stakes were high, that should David Irving win, he could then say, my, David Irving, view of the Holocaust is correct. There was the Nazis didn't hate the Jews, they didn't persecute them, Hitler had no involvement, no one was killed in gas chambers, et cetera, et cetera. That's pretty significant. That's a pretty significant rewriting of history. And I knew that was a possibility.
I mean, obviously it was quite hard to take at the time and took some kind of convincing, but do you appreciate now why it was so important not to let survivors go up to the stand?
Yes, I understand. The survivors would have been witnesses of fact. And we didn't want to suggest to the judge that there were questions about the factuality of the Holocaust, that there was a debate about how this happened, whether the survivor says this particularly happened, and maybe it was the most traumatic experience of their lives, and it happened in complete chaos as it was designed by the Nazis to happen. And we didn't want to be debate about the facts that they were putting out there, number one. Number two, we didn't want to put survivors in the witness box to be cross-examined by David Irving. He would have decimated them, not because what they said isn't true, but just because he had the power. They're elderly. He could find little flaws. They said they arrived one day and they arrived the next day. You say you arrived from Hungary on this particular train on May 8th. Well, there was no train on May 8th. It was really May 7th. All sorts of things. And the most important is, as Tom Wilkinson playing Richard Rampton says in the movie, the challenge was to keep the focus on Irving. Even though I was the defendant, he had brought the case, I was being sued, to show that he was a liar.
And can we learn something from that approach? Because it feels like these days we're all too kind of willing to give people a platform who kind of perpetuating kind of lies.
I think, we have to be careful who we give a platform to. Look, freedom of speech allows anybody can have whatever platform. They can go to Hyde Park Corner. They can go stand in front of a building and make their speech. But we don't have to let them into our homes, our schools, our institutions. We're not obligated to provide a platform. I used to have fights, less so now, but with editors of university newspapers in the United States who would let deniers have a column, and they'd say it's freedom of the press. I said, you don't understand what freedom of the press is. Freedom of the press means the government can't make a law governing what you can put in the paper and what you can't. But you don't have to give them space. And there's a big difference there. You know, some people say, oh, we have to keep an open mind. Well, sometimes your mind may be so open, your brains fall out. And I think that often happens in this case.
And have you had any contact with David Irving since this trial took place all those years ago?
And I have no desire to have any contact. I don't read his website. I don't pay attention to what he says. People call me and say, did you see what I said? No, and I don't have the time to waste on it. He stole 6 years of my life. I'm getting those back.
And seeing Timothy Spall embody him and do such a remarkable job of it must have been quite unnerving, though, at times.
It was unnerving. Timothy Spall played it magnificently. He had probably the hardest job. I mean, other than Rachel, trying to emulate my accent. But Timothy Spall had a really hard job because he could have played David Irving as a caricature. You know, how do you play a really evil guy without making him look ridiculous? And that was a challenge that Timothy has, and I think he played it magnificently.
And just finally, I was wondering, in your lifetime, do you think there's been as worrying a time politically as the one we're kind of currently going through, particularly with Brexit and obviously
You know,
Trump?
I'm not a Chicken Little character. That's the children's book who always yells, "Dear me, the sky is falling," and then when it does really fall, nobody pays attention. But so I don't like to say this is the worst time or whatever, but I'm pretty concerned. I'm concerned when leading figures, whether in the United States, whether in Britain, left, right, center, it doesn't matter, make up their own facts, say things which are completely untrue, for which there is no evidence, and then insist that they are true. And I think that that's very, very worrisome, and we should all be concerned about it.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're watching Hey You Guys!
Hey You Guys, huh?
Hey, you guys.
Is that from the Goonies?
It is indeed, yeah.
Nice.
Hey!